Alex was headed back from a delivery to Gallup when he noticed something on the train tracks ahead of him that sent a shock of fear down his spine. He immediately pulled the brake on his locomotive and sounded the air horn. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like and share this video with your friends. The small person on the track rose to their hands and knees and then slumped back down. Alex cussed heartily as he gauged the distance between his train and the person. He wasn't sure the locomotive would stop in time. Alex had been driving freight trains across the state for 10 years and knew how to keep cool in stressful situations. He put one hand on the emergency brake and waited. Pulling the emergency brake would cause a whole lot of trouble and delay, so he'd avoid using it until it was absolutely necessary. The train got closer and closer to the small person on the tracks, but it was also slowing significantly. Soon it reached a complete stop. Alex leaped from the locomotive and ran to the person on the tracks. A skinny and dirty young boy lay across the tracks. The boy looked up and said something chilling as Alex crouched beside him. "They took Sam," the boy whispered, then his eyes rolled back in his skull. Alex carried the unconscious child back to the locomotive and laid him down in the empty engineer's chair. He fetched a bottle of water and one of the granola bars he kept as snacks, then returned to the boy. "Hey kid," Alex gently shook the boy's shoulder. "I got you something to drink." The boy's eyes fluttered open. He took the water and candy bar from Alex and fell on them like a starving coyote. "Now you've had something to eat and drink, why don't you tell me who Sam is and what happened to him? Think you can do that?" The boy eyed him warily but eventually nodded. "Sam is my big brother. We were trying to grab some food off these guys at the train station, but they caught Sam. I slipped away, but I watched them tie him up and put him in a train car. I've been following them ever since." "You've been following a train? But that's insane. Where are your parents, kiddo, and what about the cops? Surely it'd be better to let them find your brother." The boy shook his head. "It's only Sam and me, mister, and I can't go to the cops. They'd send me off to some foster home and I'd never see my brother again." Alex sighed and ran his fingers through his hair. He guessed the boy was between 5 and 8 years old, way too young to have such complicated problems. "Why don't you tell me where you were when these guys took your brother? Maybe I can help you out." The boy's eyes brightened, and he sat up straight. "We were at platform 15. The men were in one of the warehouses by the station." "That can't be right. Platform 15 was shut down years ago. Nobody even uses that stretch of track anymore." "Those men do," the boy replied. "They're always there, loading things on and off the train, but it's only ever the one train that pulls in there. Me and Sam have been watching them a while." None of this made sense to Alex, but his curiosity was piqued. The boy seemed utterly convinced of his facts, and Alex reckoned the only way to prove to him he had mixed up the platform numbers was to show him. "Let's go check it out then," Alex said. "But before we go anywhere, what's your name, son?" The boy smiled a little. "Call me Nick, mister." Alex got the locomotive running again and headed off. A few hours later, he turned onto a siding near the start of the old track leading to platform 15 and stopped the train again. "We'll have to continue on foot from here since the switch isn't active anymore," Alex told Nick. "How would you like to ride on my shoulders?" The boy nodded eagerly, and the pair set off down the track. It was a warm afternoon, and Alex was wary of encountering snakes, so he kept his eyes on the ground as he followed the tracks. He started to feel that something was wrong, but it took him a while to realize what it was. Alex stopped dead as he stared at the railway tracks. A cold shiver ran down his neck. "Is something wrong, Mr. Alex?" Nick asked. "The tracks. There should be grass growing up around them. Some of these bushes should be hanging over them too, but they're not. Seems you were right, Nick. A train has been running along this line." Alex proceeded more carefully then. Whoever was using this track illegally couldn't possibly be working alone. There had to be at least one driver and controller in on whatever the people at the station were doing. He couldn't risk running into any trouble. When the station came into view, Alex set Nick down by a tall bush and proceeded alone. Alex's heart leaped into his throat when he crested a low hill and spotted a train at the platform. Alex dropped into a crouch and crept closer. His fingers shook as he removed his phone from his pocket and snapped a photo of the train's number. He then spotted the men loading long wooden crates on the train cars. He moved until he found a spot where he could take photos of the men placing the crates inside the train cars. Then Alex recorded a video for good measure, ensuring to pan over the train number and platform sign in addition to capturing the men's activities. Alex saw no sign of a young boy who might be Nick's brother. He also wasn't close enough to hear what the men might be saying to each other. He decided not to take any more risks and backtracked to the spot where he'd left Nick. "Let's get out of here," he told the boy. Alex hurried back to the yard. He took Nick with him and ran over to the office. His boss was locking up when Alex bolted inside. "Mr. Kirby, wait. I have something very important to report to you. It's about illegal activity on one of the abandoned lines." Mr. Kirby frowned. "Illegal activity? Come in and sit down, Alex. Do you have proof of this illegal activity? And who is this boy with you?" "I'll tell you everything in a moment, sir," Alex replied as he and Nick followed Mr. Kirby back into his office. "And I took photos and a video of what I saw as evidence." Alex sat and told Mr. Kirby about finding Nick on the tracks and how the boy's story had led him to check out the supposedly abandoned Platform 15. He then took out his phone and showed Mr. Kirby the evidence. Initially, Mr. Kirby stared at the video and photos with his mouth hanging open in shock. Then his face turned red, and his forehead corrugated as he frowned angrily. He insisted that Alex send the photos and video to him immediately. "How dare these scumbags use my line for their shady business?" Mr. Kirby banged his fist down on his desk. "When I get my hands on them?" Mr. Kirby clenched his jaw and rose. He rounded the desk and offered Alex his hand. "Thank you, Alex," Mr. Kirby said as he shook Alex's hand. "You've done the company, possibly even the country, a great service by reporting this to me." "It's my duty, sir, nothing more, nothing less," Alex replied. Mr. Kirby then smiled kindly at Nick. "And don't you worry, young man, I'll be calling the police as soon as possible, and I'm sure they'll find your brother." Nick muttered a thank you, but kept his head low. Despite this good news, it seemed the boy was still nervous. "Just one more thing," Mr. Kirby said as he escorted Alex and Nick to the door. "Why don't you get young Nick here something to eat and drink from the vending machine down the hall? It's on me, just let me fetch my wallet." Mr. Kirby stepped back. Immediately, a hard blow landed on the back of Alex's head. Starbursts peppered his vision. The pain was still traveling through his skull like lightning bolts when he toppled forward. The last thing he heard before he blacked out was Nick screaming for help. Alex woke up to a horrific headache, a tight, pulling sensation across the lower part of his face, and painful stiffness in his shoulders. It took him a few moments to make sense of his darkened surroundings. The only light came from narrow slits lining the walls. He was in a stationary boxcar, surrounded by the same wooden crates he'd seen earlier. The weird sensation on his face was caused by the tape across his mouth, and his shoulders were stiff because his wrists were bound and tied to something behind him. Alex spotted Nick lying on his side nearby. He couldn't reach the boy to check on him, but he could just make out the rise and fall of his side as the boy breathed. There were voices outside, and they were coming closer. "Inside this car," a man said. "There's smaller items in that one, appliances and mechanical items," a second man replied. "Okay, I see it here on your manifesto. Open up, please, so I can inspect the cargo." "Sure thing. Let me just, oh my God, rattlesnake." Chaos erupted outside. Men shouted and boots crunched on gravel. "Just a corn snake." The first man laughed nervously. "Do you reckon it got mixed up with the corn in those other cars?" the second man asked. "You better check them out." The men started walking away. Alex tried shouting to draw the first man's attention. It seemed like he was some kind of inspector, probably for the border control, which meant he could save Alex and Nick if he knew they were there. But the tape over his mouth muffled every sound he made. Although he was trying to scream at the top of his voice, all that came out was a whine. He kept trying until the men were out of earshot. Alex let his head fall forward and instantly regretted it as a renewed bout of pain arrowed into his skull. He had to think. He needed to find a way to draw that man's attention. But how? Alex was still trying to devise a plan when he heard the men returning. Despite Kamala's tragic end, Alex, Nick, and Sam were overwhelmed with relief as they managed to escape the night-nourished factory that had held them captive. Their journey had started with those ominous words, "Welcome to Mexico," echoing in their minds, and it had been a harrowing experience ever since. The old diesel locomotive, which had greeted them with its raucous roar, eventually rumbled to a halt. It had been their last hope of turning back, but as the train started moving away again, Alex felt a sense of despair settle in his chest. The train represented the beginning of a nightmare they couldn't have imagined. Their next stop brought with it two menacing figures, who roughly pulled Alex and Nick from the boxcar. As they emerged, they were confronted with an unforgiving landscape. Pale sand dunes stretched endlessly in every direction, with no sign of civilization except for a collection of buildings enclosed by a high chain-link fence. In Dale, one of the men barked as he shoved Alex's shoulder, propelling them toward the mysterious compound. Within moments, they were inside the guarded perimeter, where they found themselves in a sweltering hot factory-type building. There, they encountered a grim sight. Filthy, emaciated people were packing items into wooden crates, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. The guard assigned Alex and Nick to a corner where several people were repairing lightly damaged crates with bits of wood scavenged from crates that were beyond repair. They were immediately pressed into service, subjected to the relentless pace of the assembly line, where every second seemed to count. When Alex initially refused to work, the guard raised his gun menacingly, leaving him with no choice but to join the laborious task of crate repair. The pressure was immense, as someone was always yelling at him to hurry, and the relentless heat only added to their misery. Sunset marked the end of their grueling day. Alex and Nick, like all the other workers, filed out of the factory and joined the shuffling crowd heading towards another building. Inside, they found a cafeteria where they stood in line, awaiting their unappetizing portion of unidentifiable slop. Amidst the deplorable conditions and the questionable sustenance, Nick's gasp of recognition pierced through their desolation. He tugged on Alex's arm, pointing to a familiar face. "Look, that's my brother Sam." Cockroaches skittered openly across the table as Alex choked down the tasteless meal, his primary focus fixed on the heartwarming reunion between Nick and Sam, who were seated beside him. Sam's voice trembled as he whispered to Alex, "I looked inside one of those crates, and it was filled with guns. That's when the men caught me. They said I'd seen too much, and they had to deal with me. Next thing I knew, I was here." Alex's heart sank as he processed the gravity of Sam's revelation. Guns hidden within the crates hinted at their involvement in a sinister cartel's weapons and drug smuggling operation. Trapped within the compound's confines, surrounded by armed guards, and with an impenetrable fence separating them from the desolate desert, escape seemed impossible. The subsequent week felt like an eternity. Forced to work long hours, 6 days a week, they endured the relentless sun and the drudgery of repairing crates. The room they slept in was overcrowded, reeking, and infested with bugs, offering no respite from their ordeal. Despite the seemingly insurmountable odds, Alex couldn't relinquish hope entirely. An idea took root when he was tasked with replacing oil-stained planks on a crate's bottom. It dawned on him how easy it would be to craft containers with false bottoms, capable of concealing a person. Some crates were long and deep enough for such a purpose, and they could be loaded with the next shipment of drug-filled dolls, bound for the United States. In secrecy, Alex embarked on this covert project, gathering extra wood and meticulously constructing false bottoms for 3 of the longest crates he was assigned to repair. He discreetly marked each one for identification, knowing that this plan was their only chance at escape. However, just as he was nearing completion of the 3rd false bottom, disaster struck. The workday had just begun, and as Alex walked towards the factory with his fellow workers, a mysterious woman sidled up to him. In hushed tones, she revealed knowledge of his escape plan and threatened to expose him to the guards unless he agreed to her demands. With no viable alternative, Alex reluctantly consented to her terms. She insisted that he make one of those concealed containers for her as well, promising to accompany them once they escaped. This unexpected complication extended their wait by at least 2 more days, a prospect Alex found almost unbearable. He knew every delay increased the risks they faced, but he had no choice but to comply with the woman's request. By midday he had finished crafting the 3rd false bottom crate for her. Days later, the group of 4, consisting of Alex, Nick, Sam, and the enigmatic Kamala, gathered in the shadows as the guards carried out their evening head count. Everything was in place, and they were poised to execute their daring escape that very night. As darkness descended and they filed out of the factory towards the cafeteria, the 4 slipped away and concealed themselves behind a mound of discarded debris near the loading bay. With bated breath, they waited for the opportune moment, hoping that the absence of the dinner hour assembly would delay the discovery of their escape until the midnight bed check. Squeezed into the false bottom crates, the quartet braced themselves for a stifling, pitch-black journey. Their hearts raced as they felt their crates being hoisted and jolted, signaling the onset of their escape plan. The rugged terrain of the desert awaited them beyond those boxcar doors. Tears of relief streamed down Alex's cheeks as he realized their escape plan had succeeded. Offering them a glimmer of hope, after enduring days of torment in the factory. They were finally on their way home, but the perils of their journey were far from over.